I turned the key to my $2.3 million mansion after 2 weeks in Europe, and before I could even drop my luggage, someone was screaming, "Burglar!" from inside my house. The smell of cheap lavender air freshener hit me like a slap, definitely not the cedar scent I left behind. Mail scattered across my marble floor, lights blazing in every room, and the sound of a woman's voice shrieking into my cordless phone, "There's a dangerous man breaking into 1247 Oakwood Estates. Send everyone." Sirens wailing, gravel crunching under police tires in my driveway. That's when she appeared at the top of my staircase, wild-eyed, wearing my guest bathrobe, pointing at me like I was the criminal. "That's him!" she screamed to the 911 dispatcher. "The intruder is right there." I'm standing in my own foyer, keys still in my hand, while this complete stranger calls me the trespasser. What would you do if you came home to find someone had stolen your entire life? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I need to know this insanity isn't just happening to me. Here's the thing nobody tells you about buying your dream house. Sometimes your worst nightmare comes with it, wearing a bathrobe and holding a crowbar. My name's Marcus. I'm 45, and I clawed my way up from nothing to build a software consulting empire. After a divorce that felt like getting financially filleted, I bought this mansion in Oakwood Estates as my middle finger to the world fresh start. 3 acres of pure Georgia paradise, 30 minutes outside Atlanta. No HOA breathing down my neck, no property management company, just me, my success, and sweet, sweet independence. I travel constantly for work, which is how I afford places like this. This particular trip was a 14-day European client tour, London, Amsterdam, Berlin, the kind of business that pays for marble countertops and heated bathroom floors. I left on a Tuesday morning, house locked tighter than Fort Knox, security system armed and ready. What I didn't know was that my new neighbor had been studying me like a doctoral thesis. Meet Delilah Crenshaw, 52 years old, drives a white BMW with the license plate Watch One. And yes, that's as ominous as it sounds. She moved onto the adjacent property 6 months ago and immediately appointed herself the neighborhood's unofficial surveillance coordinator. This woman documents everything. Ring doorbell, security cameras pointing in every direction, and what appears to be a PhD in other people's business. The acrid smell of her cigarette smoke drifted across my property line every evening at 6 sharp. The sharp click, click, click of her heels on pavement became my personal dinner bell as she patrolled the neighborhood with her little notepad, documenting delivery drivers, landscapers, and anyone who committed the crime of looking suspicious, in her expert opinion. And apparently, successful black men who travel for work automatically qualify as suspicious. 3 days into my trip, she struck. Security footage from my neighbor across the street shows her walking up to my front door in broad daylight. Not sneaking, not hiding, with a crowbar like she was delivering Amazon packages. The crunch of my expensive gravel under her discount store shoes as she circled my house, testing windows. The metallic scrape of tools against locks I'd paid good money to install. She broke into my home like she'd been invited. But here's where normal burglary becomes psychological warfare. She didn't just break in, she moved in. Brought her furniture, her groceries, even her yapping little dog that sounds like a smoke detector with anxiety issues. Changed my Wi-Fi password to rightful owner, had my mail forwarded to her address, and started telling neighbors she was house-sitting for the international businessman. The smell of her cheap perfume now lingered in my guest bedroom. The sound of her dog's claws scratching across my hardwood floors. The texture of unfamiliar soap residue in my shower. When police arrived that night, there I stood, jet-lagged, bewildered, holding my own house keys, while Queen Delilah commanded the scene in my Egyptian cotton bathrobe like she was hosting a dinner party. "Officers," she announced with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this speech. "This man has been harassing me for weeks. I've been maintaining this property while the real owner travels abroad on business. I have all the proper documentation." She produced a handwritten agreement with what looked suspiciously like my forged signature. Officer Jenkins shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing something was off, but the optics were brutal. Respectable-looking white woman versus confused black man claiming to own a mansion in Georgia at midnight. "Ma'am, we need to sort this out," Jenkins said diplomatically. Then to me, "Sir, do you have identification proving residency?" Let that sink in. I had to prove I lived in my own house while standing on my own front porch. Delilah crossed her arms, still wearing my bathrobe, and delivered her Oscar-worthy performance. "I'll be contacting my attorney first thing tomorrow. This poor man clearly has mental health issues, and frankly, I fear for my safety." That's when the pieces clicked. This wasn't random crime, this was a calculated heist 6 months in the making. She'd been watching my travel patterns, learning my routines, waiting for the perfect moment to execute the most audacious real estate scam I'd ever seen. She'd stolen my dream home and somehow made me look like the criminal. The next morning, I woke up in a hotel room that cost more per night than most people's rent, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I'd somehow slipped into a parallel universe where crazy people get rewarded for being crazy. The smell of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt lobby coffee reminded me this nightmare was absolutely real. I drove back to my house at sunrise, foolishly hoping Delilah had experienced some miraculous overnight epiphany. Instead, I found her watering my prize-winning roses with my Italian garden hose, wearing my University of Georgia sweatshirt like she'd earned her doctorate in advanced squatting. That's when I discovered her opening gambit in what would become the most twisted game of real estate chess ever played. My Ring doorbell footage, completely wiped. My Wi-Fi password, changed to rightful owner 1, because apparently even in her delusions, she needed a backup plan. I couldn't access my own smart home system, couldn't check my security cameras, couldn't even turn on my own damn lights remotely. The woman had digitally evicted me from my own property, but Delilah wasn't finished with her technological warfare. She'd installed her own cameras, pointing directly at my driveway, my windows, my life. When I walked over to investigate, she burst through my front door like she'd been shot from a cannon. "Help! Stalker!" she shrieked loud enough to register on seismographs. "This disturbed man is harassing me again." 3 neighbors materialized instantly, including Mrs. Patterson from across the street, the sweet lady I'd jogged past every morning for 8 months. The confusion and growing suspicion in her eyes felt like a punch to the gut. "Delilah, honey, what's wrong?" Mrs. Patterson asked, clutching her morning coffee like a shield. "This poor, delusional man keeps returning, insisting he owns my house," Delilah sobbed, dabbing her eyes with what I recognized as my $80 Egyptian cotton kitchen towels. "I've been house-sitting here for weeks while my friend travels internationally for business. Yesterday he showed up threatening me, and now he's back, taking pictures, stalking me." I fumbled for my business card, my hands suddenly clumsy. "Mrs. Patterson, it's me, Marcus. I bought this house 8 months ago. We've talked about your garden every time I jog past." Mrs. Patterson studied my card like it was written in ancient Sanskrit. "But Delilah's been here over 2 weeks. She showed us all the paperwork. She even gave me tomatoes from the garden. My tomatoes. From my garden. That I planted." That's when the true diabolical genius of her plan hit me. While I was building million-dollar client relationships in Europe, she was building priceless community relationships in my own backyard. She hadn't just stolen my house, she'd stolen my entire neighborhood identity. I called my real estate attorney from my car, hands shaking with rage and disbelief. Bethany Rodriguez had handled my divorce, so she was no stranger to witnessing people at their absolute worst. "Marcus, this is insane, even by my standards," Bethany said, her keyboard clicking rapidly in the background. "She's playing with adverse possession laws, but here's what most people don't realize. I learned this the hard way during my property law residency. In Georgia, you need 20 continuous years of occupation before you can claim someone else's land. 20 years. This woman thinks 2 weeks makes her Davy Crockett claiming the Alamo. Then why won't the police just arrest her? Because she's created reasonable doubt with that fake paperwork? If someone genuinely believes they have permission to occupy a property, it's not technically criminal trespassing. It becomes a civil matter, which means lawyers, courts, and months of your life disappearing into legal quicksand. While I was absorbing this legal nightmare, Delilah struck again. She called 911, reporting me for stalking and criminal harassment. When Officer Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, she had Academy Award-level performance ready. "Officer, thank God you're here," she whispered, pulling my guest bathrobe tighter like she was protecting state secrets. "This man has been circling my house every few hours, taking photographs, making me feel terrified in my own home. I think he might be planning something awful. My own home." The sheer audacity made my teeth ache. "Sir?" Martinez turned to me with that special look cops reserve for people who might be criminally stupid. "This lady says you've been harassing her. Want to explain what's happening here?" I showed him everything. Mortgage documents, insurance papers, utility bills, photos of me at the housewarming party I'd thrown 6 months ago. "Officer, this is my house. She broke in while I was traveling and won't leave." Martinez studied my paperwork, confusion spreading across his face like spilled coffee. "Ma'am, what documentation do you have?" Delilah smiled like Christmas morning and disappeared into my house, returning with a folder thick enough to stop bullets, official stamps, typed agreements, and, I kid you not, a notarized rental contract that looked more legitimate than my actual deed. "Everything's here, officer. Rental agreement, renter's insurance, postal service change of address confirmation. I even have my lease renewal papers." Lease renewal papers for a house she'd been squatting in for 2 weeks. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting for my sanity in a world where fiction had apparently become more convincing than fact. 2 days later, I'm sitting in my lawyer's office pretending to understand legal jargon when my phone starts buzzing like it's having a seizure. Text after text from unknown numbers. Then my business line rings with the sound of impending financial doom. "Marcus, this is Janet from Pinnacle Tech Solutions," my biggest client says, her voice colder than a penguin's breakfast. "We need to discuss your situation." "What situation?" I ask, though my stomach is already practicing Olympic-level gymnastics. "The fraud investigation. Someone contacted us about your ongoing federal case. Property fraud, harassment charges, possible mental instability. We can't risk our reputation working with contractors under criminal investigation." My $200,000 annual contract just evaporated faster than water on hot asphalt. "Janet, there's no federal case. Someone's lying to you." "I'm sorry, Marcus. The decision's final." That's when I realized Delilah had graduated from amateur hour squatting to professional-grade life destruction. I raced home to find her hosting what looked like a neighborhood militia meeting on my front lawn. 12 residents gathered around my expensive teak patio furniture, sipping coffee from my wedding china that survived the divorce, while Delilah commanded the center like Napoleon planning his next conquest. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with the theatrical flair of someone auditioning for a soap opera, "we're facing a clear and present danger. This individual has been stalking me for days, making threats, claiming ownership of property that obviously belongs to established community members." Mrs. Patterson nodded like a bobblehead in a hurricane. "It's terrifying. He seemed so normal during our morning conversations." "That's exactly how predators operate," Delilah continued, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper crazy people use when they're absolutely convinced they're saving civilization. "They infiltrate communities, gain trust, then strike when we're most vulnerable. I've already contacted Sheriff Crenshaw about increased patrols and background checks on suspicious individuals." Background checks. On me. In my own neighborhood. I approached the group and 12 conversations died simultaneously like someone had pulled the power cord on reality. The rich aroma of my own imported Colombian coffee, those $1.30 per pound beans I'd discovered in a tiny Decatur roastery, drifted mockingly past my nose as these people stared at me like I was patient zero in a zombie outbreak. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Marcus. I've lived here for 8 months. Delilah's face transformed into a masterpiece of terrified victimhood. "Please stay back. You're violating the court order." "What court order?" She whipped out official-looking papers like a magician revealing the winning lottery ticket. "Temporary restraining order, filed yesterday. You're legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me or my residence." My residence. She'd actually convinced a judge to exile me from my own property, using nothing but crocodile tears and forged documents. The next 6 hours were a masterclass in systematic destruction. Delilah had somehow obtained my client list and was methodically calling every business contact, weaving tales about my deteriorating mental state and ongoing investigation by multiple law enforcement agencies. My phone became a torture device. Client after client canceled contracts. 15 years of spotless reputation crumbling like a sandcastle in a tsunami. But here's where Delilah's overconfidence became her Achilles heel. I hired Tommy Remy, a private investigator who looked like he belonged in a library, but investigated like he belonged in a spy novel. Tommy had this gift for asking innocent questions that made people confess their life stories without realizing it. 48 hours later, he delivered Christmas morning in a manila folder. "Your squatter's a serial offender," Tommy said, sliding photographs across the Starbucks table, because meeting in my own house was apparently illegal now. Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina. Same pattern every time. Target successful single men who travel, occupy their property while they're gone, create fake documentation, destroy their reputation if they fight back. The photos were devastating. Delilah entering and exiting different properties, always with the same confident stride, always carrying the same thick folder of fabricated legitimacy. Police reports showing a trail of victims who'd eventually given up and moved rather than fight her legal warfare. "Gets better," Tommy continued with the satisfied smile of someone who'd struck investigative gold. Bankruptcy filing 2 years ago. Lost everything. But here's the kicker. Her brother-in-law is Deputy Chief Harold Crenshaw. That's how she gets favorable police treatment and inside information about her targets. I remembered something my business mentor told me during those brutal early years when competitors were trying to destroy my startup. When someone has nothing left to lose, they become the most dangerous person in the room. Delilah had lost everything: home, marriage, financial security, and now she was weaponizing her desperation against anyone successful enough to become her target. That evening, Deputy Chief Crenshaw himself appeared at my hotel door like a perfectly pressed omen of corruption. "Mr. Marcus," he said, his badge gleaming under the hallway fluorescence, "perhaps we could resolve this situation quietly. Delilah's been through hell lately. Lost her husband, bankruptcy, really struggling, man to man. Maybe you could find it in your heart to work something out. Translation: abandon your property, or we'll make your life even more miserable." I looked at this corrupt cop trying to intimidate me into surrendering my own home and felt something shift from victim to warrior. Tell Delilah the only thing I'm working out is her eviction. The war had officially begun. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail that made my blood pressure spike into low Earth orbit. The IRS. Apparently, someone had reported me for hiding substantial rental income from my multiple investment properties. Because nothing says rise and shine like a federal tax investigation based on complete fiction. But Delilah was just getting warmed up in her symphony of destruction. My mortgage company called next, expressing concerns about me violating occupancy terms by subletting without proper disclosure. Then my insurance agent worried about unauthorized long-term residents affecting my homeowner's policy. She'd systematically contacted every financial institution connected to my life, painting me as some kind of slumlord running an illegal rental empire from the shadows. The woman had turned financial sabotage into high art. I drove past my house, her alleged palace, and nearly spit coffee all over my dashboard. A bright yellow sign now decorated my front yard like a neon middle finger. Mechanics lien filed, $15,000 owed for property maintenance and repairs. She was billing me for maintaining the house she'd stolen. The sheer audacity was so breathtaking it deserved its own NASA space program. But Tommy Remy had been busy digging through Delilah's past like an archaeological expedition into criminal creativity, and what he discovered made her fake liens look like kindergarten finger painting. "Marcus, buckle up," Tommy said, sliding a folder thick enough to stop bullets across our usual Starbucks table. The smell of overpriced espresso mixed with the musty scent of old legal documents as I opened what looked like a serial criminal's greatest hits collection. Eviction notices from Knoxville, arrest records from Charlotte, a restraining order filed by an elderly professor in Columbia whose house she'd occupied for 3 months, claiming to be his long-lost great-niece who'd fallen on hard times. "She's got a type," Tommy continued, spreading out a timeline that looked like a predator's hunting schedule. "Successful single men who travel frequently. She studies them on social media for months, learns their routines, then strikes like a real estate vampire when they're most vulnerable." My hands trembled as I flipped through photos of her previous victims. A tech executive in Nashville who'd paid her $50,000 in hush money. A surgeon in Asheville who'd sold his dream home and fled to Florida rather than fight her psychological warfare. "But here's where it gets really twisted," Tommy said, lowering his voice to conspiracy theory levels. "Her own daughter wants to meet with you." That afternoon, I sat across from Rebecca Crenshaw in a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and redemption. She looked like Delilah might have 20 years ago, before desperation and untreated mental illness had carved permanent worry lines into her soul. "My mother is broken," Rebecca said quietly, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd spent years trying to save someone who didn't want saving. "She's been doing this since Dad died, and she lost everything to bad real estate investments. It started small, staying in vacation rentals past checkout, claiming family emergencies. Then it escalated." Rebecca pulled out her phone with the reverence of someone handling evidence that could destroy her own family. The recording that played made my stomach perform Olympic-level gymnastics. Delilah's voice, crystal clear and terrifyingly calculated. "Rebecca, I found the perfect target. Travels constantly for business, recently divorced so no wife to complicate things, big house, definitely has money. I've been studying him for months. The moment he leaves for that European consulting trip, I'm executing the plan." The timestamp showed 3 days before my Amsterdam departure. She's been stalking you since the day you moved in, Rebecca continued, tears flowing freely now. I found notebooks in her apartment, pages of research about your business clients, your jogging schedule, even copies of your divorce papers she somehow obtained. She knew your entire life story before she ever touched your front door. The room felt like it was spinning. This wasn't random crime or opportunistic squatting. This was a months-long psychological hunting expedition that had culminated in the systematic theft of my entire existence. Why tell me this? I managed to ask. Because I'm done watching her destroy innocent people, Rebecca said, her voice strengthening with each word. And because she's getting worse, more paranoid, more desperate. Last week she asked me about buying a gun for protection. I think she might actually hurt someone. That evening, Delilah revealed just how far into desperation she'd fallen. She'd attempted to transfer my utilities into her name, claiming landlord abandonment of rental property. When the utility companies refused, she'd filed a health department complaint alleging I was operating an unsafe, illegal rooming house with multiple undocumented tenants. But her fatal mistake was getting greedy with my mail. Tommy had coordinated with postal inspectors to set up surveillance on my mailbox, because federal mail theft carries sentences that even corrupt deputy chiefs can't make disappear. The footage showed Delilah systematically pillaging my correspondence, opening bank statements and insurance documents like she was unwrapping Christmas presents. 20 years maximum federal sentence. Suddenly, her brother-in-law's protection looked significantly less bulletproof. My phone rang just as I was reviewing the evidence that could finally destroy her. Unknown number. Hello, Marcus, Delilah's voice, honey-sweet with undertones of barely controlled desperation. I believe it's time we discuss terms. I have a proposition. The hunter was ready to negotiate. Her house of cards was collapsing. Tomorrow, Oakwood Community Center, 7 p.m., there's a town hall about neighborhood safety. Her laugh was sharp as broken glass. Come alone, and perhaps we can reach an understanding. She wanted a public stage for her final performance. Perfect. So did I. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about Delilah's confidence during that phone call gnawed at me like a dog with a favorite bone. She was cornered, facing federal charges, but she still sounded like someone holding pocket aces in a poker game where everyone else was bluffing. I called Tommy at midnight. There's something we're missing. Her research was too personal, too thorough, like she knew things about me that weren't in any public record. Funny you mention that, he said, his voice groggy but alert. Rebecca gave me some personal items from her mother's apartment. I sent them for DNA analysis on a hunch. DNA analysis? Tommy, that seems excessive? Yeah, until you see the results. The next morning, Tommy arrived at my hotel looking like someone who'd just discovered the earth was actually flat. The smell of his nervous sweat mixed with stale coffee as he sat down heavily across from me. Marcus, I need you to sit down for this. I am sitting down. Then maybe lie down. He slid a lab report across the table with hands that were visibly shaking. Delilah Crenshaw isn't some random con artist who happened to target you. I scanned the technical gibberish until one line jumped out like a slap to the face. Probability of half-sibling relationship, 99.7%. The hotel room tilted sideways. That can't be right. Your father, Robert Marcus, had an affair 32 years ago with Linda Crenshaw. She worked as a secretary at his accounting firm. When she got pregnant, she disappeared. Never told him he had another child. I felt like someone had replaced my blood with carbonated water. Every interaction with Delilah suddenly took on a horrifying new dimension. The way she'd studied my morning routines, her obsession with my travel schedule, her intimate knowledge of my divorce details. She's been watching you for 3 years, Tommy continued, pulling out more documents that looked like a stalker's manifesto. Ever since your father died and she hired a genealogist to find family members. That's when she discovered she had a successful half-brother who'd inherited everything while she got nothing. But Dad never mentioned, because he never knew she existed. But here's where it gets really twisted. Tommy showed me financial documents that made my stomach perform emergency surgery on itself. Your father left a second life insurance policy, $500,000. Delilah was listed as the beneficiary, but she never knew it existed until she started digging into his estate. The room was spinning like a carnival ride operated by drunk teenagers. So this whole squatting scheme was never about stealing your house. It was about establishing legal residence on inherited property. Tommy's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. In Georgia, if she can prove she's his daughter and show she's been living on property that was partially inherited, remember, your dad co-signed that down payment loan, she can claim both the insurance money and a portion of your house value. I remembered something my father used to say when I was a kid. Marcus, family is everything, but sometimes everything includes people you wish weren't family. I thought he was talking about distant cousins who borrowed money. Turns out he was talking about secret children who'd grow up to steal my house. My phone buzzed with a text message that made my hands shake. See you tonight, little brother. Time for the family reunion Dad never got to plan. Hope you're ready to share. D. She'd known from day one. Every moment of harassment, every forged document, every destroyed client relationship, it was all calculated revenge for an inheritance she believed I'd stolen from a father who never even knew she existed. Tonight's town hall wasn't going to be a confrontation between a homeowner and a squatter. It was going to be a family feud with a multi-million-dollar inheritance hanging in the balance, broadcast live to the entire community, and I still had no idea who the real villain was in this story. I spent the next 6 hours in what can only be described as a strategic panic attack with a law degree. My hotel room looked like a hurricane had hit a law library. Legal documents scattered across every surface, DNA reports taped to mirrors, and enough empty coffee cups to supply a small caffeine addiction clinic. The smell of cold room service burgers mixed with the musty scent of decade-old case files as I tried to process the fact that I was about to go to war with a sister I'd never known existed. First call, Bethany Rodriguez, who listened to the DNA bombshell with the kind of stunned silence usually reserved for surprise pregnancy announcements. Marcus, this is either the best thing that could have happened to your case or the worst, she said finally. If she's really your half-sister with legitimate inheritance claims, we're not fighting simple trespassing anymore. We're in family law hell, where logic goes to die and emotions write the verdicts. So what's our move? We assemble the A-team and pray we're smarter than a desperate woman with nothing left to lose. Within 2 hours, my hotel suite had transformed into mission control for the most dysfunctional family reunion in Georgia history. Bethany brought Dr. Patricia Valdez, a family mediator who looked like someone's grandmother but negotiated like a UN diplomat. Tommy Remy continued his role as our personal intelligence agency. And Rebecca Crenshaw sat in the corner, a daughter preparing to publicly betray her mother for the greater good. The texture of legal briefs felt strange under my fingers as Dr. Valdez spread her expertise across my makeshift war room. Here's what civilians don't understand about inheritance disputes, she began, adjusting her reading glasses. Even if Delilah has valid claims to your father's estate, her methods are textbook criminal behavior. You can't rob a bank and then argue you needed the money for legitimate expenses. That nugget hit me like a revelation I should have had years ago during business school. Legitimate grievances don't justify illegal solutions. Even rightful heirs can face federal prison time for fraud, forgery, and mail theft while pursuing inheritance claims. But here's the psychological trap we need to avoid, Dr. Valdez continued. If we come across as the successful son crushing his poor, desperate sister, public sympathy swings her direction fast. Family drama makes people stupid. Tommy looked up from his laptop, where he'd been orchestrating what appeared to be a small-scale intelligence operation. Good news and bad news. Good news. Postal inspectors have enough evidence to arrest her during tonight's meeting if we give the signal. Bad news, she's hired Marcus Wade, that shark attorney from Atlanta who specializes in David versus Goliath inheritance cases. Rebecca's phone buzzed with notifications that sounded like a digital slot machine. She's gone full social media warfare, Rebecca announced, reading from her screen. Posted on Facebook that she's the long-lost sister finally reunited with the brother who's been hiding her existence to steal her inheritance. 300 shares in the last hour. The public narrative was shifting faster than stock prices during a market crash. I could already see the headlines. Wealthy tech bro calls police on homeless half-sister. We need to let her destroy herself, I said, feeling the strategy crystallize like a solution in a chemistry experiment. Give her enough rope to hang herself with her own lies, then offer real solutions after she's lost credibility. Bethany nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose client was finally thinking strategically. In public disputes, whoever stays calm while their opponent has a meltdown wins the crowd. Emotional control beats legal facts when there's an audience. Something I learned during my brutal divorce proceedings echoed in my head. Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. My ex-wife had destroyed her own credibility by lying about easily verifiable facts in front of our mediator. Tonight, I'd give Delilah the same opportunity. Our battle plan was elegantly simple. Let Delilah present her case first. She'd inevitably overstate her claims and contradict herself. Then I'd present the criminal evidence methodically. Mail theft footage, forged documents, recordings of her planning the scheme. Finally, the olive branch. Genuine family reconciliation and fair inheritance distribution, but only after she faced justice for her crimes. Tommy had prepared a presentation that would make CSI jealous. Security footage of the break-in, postal inspector evidence, victim testimony from 3 states, plus Rebecca's recordings. We've got enough evidence to sink a battleship, let alone one desperate squatter. What about her legitimate inheritance claims? I asked. Here's the beautiful irony. Bethany smiled, like someone who'd just solved a crossword puzzle in pen. That second insurance policy she's claiming? She actually tried to collect it 2 years ago, but was denied for insufficient proof of paternity. Our DNA evidence proves she was right all along. She is entitled to that money. Rebecca looked genuinely shocked. Mom never mentioned trying to claim any insurance. Because admitting that would reveal she's been planning this revenge scheme for years instead of just discovering she had a brother, Tommy explained. The evening air carried the distant aroma of barbecue from the community center as we prepared for battle. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about what kind of family we'd become after tonight. Either we'd find a way to be siblings, or we'd destroy each other trying. The morning of the town hall, I woke up to discover Delilah had launched a nuclear strike on my professional life. My phone looked like a digital crime scene. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and enough angry emails to crash a small server. Marcus, this is Dr. Sarah Remy from Pinnacle Medical, one voicemail began. We've been contacted by your sister about serious fraud allegations. Our legal department is recommending immediate contract termination. Another. Mr. Marcus, this is TechFlow Solutions. A family member reached out with very disturbing information about ongoing federal investigations. We need to discuss severing our partnership immediately. She'd weaponized the sister revelation, calling every client on my website with tales of my deteriorating mental state and history of financial fraud targeting vulnerable family members. The genius was diabolical. Who questions a concerned sister reporting her brother's crimes? But while Delilah was busy destroying my business, I was busy building her prison. Tommy had spent the morning coordinating with postal inspectors, who were now stationed around the community center in unmarked cars. Rebecca had provided additional recordings from her mother's apartment, including one where Delilah practiced her vulnerable victim speech in front of a mirror. The most damning evidence arrived an hour before the meeting. Security footage from my neighbor showing Delilah spray painting deadbeat brother across my garage door at 3 a.m., then calling police to report threatening graffiti on her property. The woman had vandalized my house, then reported herself as the victim. The community center was packed tighter than a Black Friday sale, with the added bonus of news crews treating my family drama like breaking news. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with nervous sweat as half of Oakwood Estates crammed into folding chairs arranged like a courtroom. Delilah sat front row center, wearing what I now recognized as my mother's vintage Chanel blazer. Apparently, she'd been shopping in my closet during her squatting vacation. Her transformation into grieving sister was Oscar-worthy. Hunched shoulders, trembling hands, and tissues strategically positioned for maximum sympathy. Ladies and gentlemen, the community director announced, Miss Crenshaw has requested to speak first about recent incidents affecting our neighborhood. Delilah approached the podium like she was walking toward her execution, slowly, dramatically, milking every step for emotional impact. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, forcing the entire room to strain forward. What I'm about to share breaks my heart, she began, dabbing her eyes with tissues I recognized from my own bathroom. 3 weeks ago, I discovered I had a half-brother, a wealthy, successful man who inherited everything from our father, while I inherited nothing but heartbreak. The room was silent except for the soft whir of news cameras capturing every theatrical moment. When I reached out to connect with my only remaining family, hoping for compassion during the hardest period of my life, he had me arrested. Her voice cracked on cue. For weeks, I've been staying in what I believed was family property, a house our deceased father helped purchase. I thought I was finally home. I watched neighbors who'd known me for months nodding sympathetically at this woman who'd been systematically stalking my life for years. The crowd was buying her performance wholesale. Instead, I found myself terrorized by a man who sees his own sister as nothing more than an obstacle to his stolen inheritance, she continued, building to what was clearly her prepared crescendo. I have documentation proving our father's investment in that property, evidence of my peaceful attempts at contact, and witnesses to Marcus's increasingly violent and erratic behavior. There was the first lie I'd been waiting for. She pulled out her familiar folder of fabricated documents. I also have proof of his business practices, systematic tax evasion, client fraud, and the abuse of his wealth to silence anyone who threatens his criminal empire. And there was the fatal overreach. She'd just accused me of federal crimes in front of cameras and witnesses, crossing the line from family dispute into criminal defamation. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. She's having a complete breakdown. Last night she told me she's going to destroy him like he destroyed Dad. She's not even making sense anymore. Looking more closely at Delilah, I realized Rebecca was right. Her eyes had that glassy, manic intensity that comes from someone who's lost the ability to distinguish between performance and reality. She wasn't acting anymore. She actually believed her own fabricated mythology. While I sleep in my car, Marcus lives in luxury, she declared, her voice rising with each word. He's hired private investigators to stalk me, intercepted my mail, even turned my own daughter against me with bribes and threats. This man will stop at nothing to protect his blood money. The texture of my prepared notes felt steady in my hands as I watched her dig her own legal grave. But Tommy grabbed my arm before I could stand. "Wait," he whispered. "She's about to contradict herself again." Sure enough. I only discovered our father's death 6 months ago when I hired a genealogist to trace my family history. But her social media posts from that morning claimed she'd been fighting for years to contact the brother who stole my inheritance. The woman couldn't keep her timeline straight under pressure. I could see confusion replacing sympathy on several faces in the crowd. She was losing them, one lie at a time. My moment was coming. But Delilah wasn't finished with her performance. As murmurs of confusion started rippling through the crowd, she doubled down with the desperation of someone whose entire world was collapsing in real time. "And if that wasn't enough," she announced, pulling out her phone like she was revealing state secrets, "I have recordings of Marcus threatening me, admitting to tax fraud, even discussing how to have me permanently silenced." She hit play on what sounded like a phone conversation. But the audio was so obviously edited, it might as well have had fake watermarks scrolling across it. Different background noises, inconsistent audio quality, and what sounded suspiciously like my voice saying things I'd never said spliced together like a ransom note made of magazine clippings. "He told me, and I quote, 'I'll destroy you before I let you take what's mine,'" she declared triumphantly. Except I'd never spoken to her on the phone. Ever. Every interaction we'd had was either in person with witnesses or through attorneys. The woman had just played fabricated evidence to a room full of people who were starting to realize they were watching someone have a very public mental breakdown. Mrs. Patterson stood up from the third row, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. "Delilah, dear, that doesn't sound right. Marcus doesn't even have a southern accent, but that recording—" "You're all being fooled by his money and charm," Delilah shrieked, her carefully constructed victim persona evaporating like morning dew. "Rich people always protect each other. He's probably paying half of you to discredit me." And there it was, the paranoid accusation that transformed her from sympathetic victim to unhinged conspiracy theorist in front of a live audience. The room's energy shifted like someone had flipped a switch, sympathy turning to uncomfortable concern. But Delilah had apparently decided to go down swinging. "Since none of you will listen to reason, maybe you'll listen to this," she announced, producing what looked like a pistol from her purse. The room erupted into chaos faster than a food fight in a middle school cafeteria. People diving under chairs, someone screaming for police, news cameras swinging wildly to capture the moment when a property dispute became a hostage situation. Except it wasn't a pistol. It was a taser, which somehow made the situation both less dangerous and more absurd simultaneously. "Nobody leaves until Marcus admits what he stole from our family," she screamed, waving the taser like a magic wand that would somehow transform her lies into truth. That's when Harold Crenshaw burst through the back doors with 2 state investigators in tow, their timing so perfect it felt scripted. "Delilah, put that down right now. Harold, finally someone with authority, arrest Marcus for theft, fraud, and threatening his own sister." But Harold wasn't rushing to her rescue. He was rushing to arrest her. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for aggravated assault, public endangerment, and violation of federal mail fraud statutes," one of the state investigators announced, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife through warm butter. The taser clattered to the floor as reality finally crashed into Delilah's fantasy world with the force of a freight train. "Harold, what are you doing? I'm family!" "You're a criminal," Harold replied, his voice heavy with what sounded like years of suppressed frustration. And frankly, Delilah, you've embarrassed this family enough." As they handcuffed her, she turned toward me with eyes that held more hatred than I'd thought humanly possible. "This isn't over, Marcus. I'll appeal everything. I'll sue you for emotional damages. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," the investigator continued. "I strongly suggest you use it." Tommy appeared at my side, grinning like someone who'd just won the lottery. "Postal inspectors have been building a federal case for the past week. Mail fraud, identity theft, interstate wire fraud. She's looking at serious federal time." Rebecca pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry about all of this. She's been getting worse for months, and I should have done something sooner." The smell of fear sweat and spilled coffee filled the air as people slowly emerged from their improvised hiding spots. News cameras captured every moment of Delilah being led away in handcuffs, still screaming about family betrayal and stolen inheritance. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, finally approaching the podium as the room settled into stunned silence, "I think we all just witnessed why it's important to verify claims before believing them." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson was the first to stand and applaud, followed by others who were apparently relieved that their neighbor wasn't actually a tax-evading criminal mastermind. "For those who are interested," I continued, "I have actual documentation about tonight's events, including evidence of mail fraud, property trespassing, and systematic harassment that's been ongoing for weeks." But the real bombshell was still coming. Tommy had saved the best evidence for last. A recording of Delilah admitting to her daughter that the whole family connection might be fabricated too. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Sometimes it's just more satisfying. As the handcuffs clicked around Delilah's wrists, she turned toward the crowd with the desperate energy of someone whose final card had just been played and found wanting. "You're all fools if you believe him," she screamed, her voice echoing off the community center walls like a wounded animal. "Marcus has been planning this setup for months. He knew I was his sister and deliberately destroyed my life to protect his inheritance." The state investigator tried to guide her toward the exit, but Delilah planted her feet like a mule refusing to move. "I have proof, DNA evidence, legal documentation. Our father's will explicitly mentions—" "Ma'am, you need to stop talking," the investigator warned. But Delilah was beyond reason now, her desperation transforming into a final, spectacular confession. "I spent months researching him. I know every business deal, every client meeting, every time he left that house empty. I earned the right to that property through surveillance and planning." The room fell silent except for the soft whir of news cameras capturing every self-incriminating word. She'd just admitted to premeditated stalking and criminal conspiracy in front of 50 witnesses and 3 television crews. "I broke into that house because it was rightfully mine," she continued, apparently unaware that she was destroying any remaining legal defense. "I forged those documents because the real ones were stolen. I intercepted his mail because he was hiding assets that belonged to our family." Harold Crenshaw looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Delilah, please stop talking." "No, someone needs to hear the truth." She turned toward the news cameras with the fervor of someone who'd confused confession with vindication. "I created fake rental agreements, yes. I filed false police reports, yes. But only because Marcus forced me to use desperate measures to claim what was legally mine. It was the most thorough confession I'd ever witnessed. She'd just admitted to every single crime we'd been investigating, while somehow believing she was proving her innocence." That's when Tommy stood up and delivered our mic drop moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, pulling out his phone, "I have a recording made 3 days ago of Miss Crenshaw admitting to her daughter that she fabricated the entire family connection." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Even Delilah stopped struggling against her handcuffs. Tommy hit play. Delilah's voice, crystal clear. "Rebecca, the DNA test was inconclusive, but Marcus doesn't know that. I paid that lab technician to alter the results. Rich people believe anything that comes with official letterhead." The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room shifted between the recording device and Delilah, whose face had turned the color of old milk. That's taken out of context," she stammered, but her voice had lost all its previous conviction. "There's more," Tommy continued. "Rebecca, would you like to share what your mother told you about her research methods?" Rebecca stood slowly, her hands shaking as she approached the microphone. 3 months ago, my mother showed me notebooks full of information about Marcus. His travel schedule, his business contacts, his daily routines. She'd been watching him for over a year, planning this whole scheme." She pulled out her own phone. I recorded our conversation because I was scared of what she was planning. Another recording played. I found the perfect mark, Rebecca. Travels constantly, recently divorced. No close family to complicate things. I've studied every aspect of his life. When he leaves for that European trip, I'm going to make him pay for having everything I deserved. The community center felt like a courtroom where the defendant had just confessed to every charge while insisting on their innocence. Delilah's elaborate mythology was crumbling in real time, each revelation more damning than the last. "So you're not actually related?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice carrying the confusion of someone trying to follow a plot twist in a bad movie. "The original DNA test showed no family relationship," Rebecca said quietly. "My mother paid someone to falsify the results because she thought it would give her legal standing to claim his property." Delilah made one final desperate attempt at control. "You can't trust her. She's being paid by Marcus to lie about her own mother." But the crowd had heard enough. The applause started slowly, from Mrs. Patterson in the third row, then spread through the room like wildfire. Not applause for entertainment, but relief that their neighbor wasn't a criminal, and their community wasn't harboring a family feud that had escalated to federal crimes. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, finally taking the microphone as Delilah was led toward the exit, "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight and witnessing the truth. This has been the most bizarre month of my life, but it's also taught me the importance of community, evidence-based decision-making, and always keeping your security cameras updated." Laughter rippled through the crowd, genuine laughter, not the nervous kind that had dominated the evening. I also want to thank Rebecca for having the courage to do the right thing, even when it meant standing against her own mother. As the state investigators finally managed to escort Delilah outside, her final words echoed through the community center. "This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll sue. The door closed, cutting off her threats mid-sentence. For the first time in weeks, my house was truly mine again. The smell of fresh coffee and victory tastes surprisingly similar. Both bitter at first, then sweet when you add the right ingredients. I'm sitting on my back patio this morning, watching sunrise paint my 3 acres in shades of gold and amber, thinking about how the worst month of my life somehow transformed into the foundation for the best year I've ever had. Delilah got 3 years in federal prison for mail fraud, identity theft, and interstate wire fraud. The judge wasn't moved by her tearful apologies, especially after prosecutors revealed she'd targeted 4 other successful men across 3 states using nearly identical schemes. I wasn't her first victim, just her most stubborn one who refused to be bulldozed into submission. But here's what I learned about real justice. It's not just about watching bad people get punished. It's about building something better from the wreckage they leave behind. The day after her sentencing, I did something that surprised even my attorney. I established the Oakwood Community Justice Fund with $100,000 from her asset forfeiture settlement. The fund provides free legal aid to residents facing property fraud, harassment, or situations where bullies with resources try to intimidate people without them. Because nobody should have to prove they belong in their own home while standing on their own front porch. We've already helped Mrs. Patterson fight off the contractor who tried to scam her for $15,000 in unnecessary roof repairs, assisted a young couple whose landlord attempted to steal their security deposit through fraudulent damage claims, and provided representation for 3 families targeted by predatory lending schemes that would have cost them their homes. The fund partners with our local law school, creating internships where students gain real-world experience while serving people who couldn't otherwise afford legal help. Here's something most people don't know. Every state has rapid response programs for fraudulent property claims. File the correct paperwork within 30 days, and bogus liens can be dismissed faster than a bad Tinder date. Rebecca visits monthly, usually bearing homemade cookies and updates about her mother's progress in prison therapy programs. Delilah is apparently responding well to treatment for her personality disorders and has begun working with counselors to understand how desperation and untreated mental illness transformed her into someone she never intended to become. "She's not the same person who broke into your house," Rebecca told me during her last visit, the texture of her grandmother's cookie recipe crumbling between my fingers. Prison therapy helped her realize that trauma doesn't justify traumatizing others. My business recovered faster than a cat video goes viral. Clients who'd initially fled returned once the complete story emerged, and several new contracts came specifically because of how I'd handled the crisis with integrity. Apparently, Grace Under Pressure is excellent marketing in the consulting world. The house got some upgrades beyond just security improvements. I renovated the guest suite that Delilah had, creatively redecorated during her unauthorized residence. It's now a home office where I can work without constant travel because being forced to defend your home makes you appreciate actually living in it. Our neighborhood transformed from a collection of strangers into an actual community. Monthly barbecues replaced awkward property line disputes. We have a legitimate neighborhood watch program and a group text where people genuinely look out for each other instead of just complaining about garbage pickup schedules. Mrs. Patterson has become our local celebrity for her role in exposing Delilah's deception. She's writing a book about the experience, How I Helped Catch a Con Artist While Learning About Modern Technology, because apparently she's never used DNA testing or smartphone recordings before this adventure. Last month, we hosted our first annual Oakwood Community Justice Day. Picture this: block party atmosphere with educational workshops about tenant rights, property protection, and fraud recognition. The aroma of grilled burgers mixed with children's laughter, while adults learned legal resources they hoped never to need. We raised an additional $50,000 for the Justice Fund, proving people will support their neighbors when given meaningful opportunities. The morning air carries Mrs. Patterson's wind chimes tinkling in the breeze as my phone buzzes with a text from Rebecca. Mom wants to write you a letter of apology. Would you be willing to read it? Some stories end with revenge served cold. Others end with relationships rebuilt stronger than before. I'm hoping ours ends with both healing and wisdom. Drop a comment with your worst HOA or neighbor nightmare. I read every single story and yours might be featured in a future video. And if you enjoyed watching Justice Served with a side of community transformation, hit that subscribe button because I've got 47 more tales about people who thought they could outsmart the system and discovered that truth always finds a way to win.